question, make fun of them.
Subvert?
We all have thick skin. Just don't make fun of the moderator, I guess. He's perfect. You can make fun of him. But other than that, looking forward to it. Why don't we just jump in? I don't think either of you really need that much of an introduction. So Andrew is the challenger. You get to go first. You have up to 7 minutes for your opening statement. Whenever you're ready.
Sure. You guys can hear me okay?
Of course, they're
okay, great.
Partners.
Well, thank you, Dave, for coming to tonight's debate.
It's all
I
going
appreciate
to the
it.
college fund.
I want to let you know the reason I'm having this debate with you is because I think I can bring you to the dark side of the force, and you're already halfway there. My hope is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end, a system which inevitably leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarians currently have a Skittles nominee for president is because the very ideology itself is corrupt. It starts with the very core idea on which all other ideas are based, which is self-ownership. I know this is a doctrine that Mr. Smith does believe because I have seen him reference it multiple times in multiple appearances, most recently on Reason TV in his case against open borders. It's a failing dogma because it opens up the ultimate
I remember it went viral some years ago, but they have a whole platform where they connect influencers to political.
If we all right, I can't sit on hold all night.
Can of worms. If people really do own themselves, then we really can't engage with any voluntary actions they take with each other and stop them, overrule them, or force them not to do those actions. This is exactly why Skittles in society exists. By this logic, we can't outlaw incest, prostitution. We can't outlaw gay marriage. We can't outlaw polygamy. We can't even outlaw unaliving yourself. Gay marriage.
Guys, I don't think either of you really need that 10 minutes for your opening statement. Whenever you're ready.
Sure. You guys can hear me okay?
All right, I can't do this.
Okay,
Sorry,
great. Well, thank you, Dave, for coming into tonight's debate. I appreciate it. I want to let you know the reason I'm having this debate with you is because I think I can bring you to the dark side of the force, and you're already halfway there. My hope is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end, a system which inevitably leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarians currently have a Skittles nominee for president is because the very ideology itself is corrupt. It starts with the very core idea on which all other ideas are based, which is self-ownership. I know this is a doctrine that Mr. Smith does believe because I have seen him reference it multiple times in multiple appearances, most recently on Reason TV in his case against open borders. It's a failing dogma because it opens up the ultimate can of worms. If people really do own themselves, then we really can't engage with any voluntary actions they take with each other and stop them, overrule them, or force them not to do those actions. This is exactly why Skittles in society exists. By this logic, we can't outlaw incest, prostitution. We can't outlaw gay marriage. We can't outlaw polygamy. We can't even outlaw unaliving yourself. All things which Christian ethics point to as absolutely immoral. Dave can't really say that.
The title of this debate, this is Andrew Wilson versus Dave Smith, libertarian. The title is Libertarianism better than Christian populism? But I've never heard Andrew call himself a Christian populist. I think he considers himself a Christian nationalist, but that's kind of like a taboo term now. The media will, like, Christians like made that word up, and then within like 2 months, all of the media decided together, nope, let's outlaw that. Can't say that. Can't say that. Those are Nazis. So now that's like a bad word. Christian nationalism. So I think for the sake of his channel is why they call it Christian populism. And Andrew will probably call it Christian populism in this, but I'm pretty sure what he means is Christian nationalist. Because I've heard him do debates about that before.
That they are, though. They have to be allowed if you own yourself, or it would be a violation of the self-ownership doctrine. It's nice and all that Mr. Smith has distanced himself from the failure that is the modern Libertarian Party, and I applaud him for doing it, but ultimately, the very reason he had to is because of this reason. It always leads to the absurd outcome of mass degeneracy. It has to. There's no way around it. Dave assumes, for reasons I don't understand, that his solution of non-promotion yet legalization somehow better than the alternative of the state utilizing authority to remove these moral plagues. I want the state busting up prostitution rings and pimps. I want them arresting incest practitioners, and I want them to arrest polygamists. I want them to use force to prevent unaliving of oneself. The anarcho-capitalist, in this case Dave, can't justify the state really doing any of those things. The Christian ethicist can, striking a key balance between what he would call totalitarianism and what are considered freedoms. For us, though, Mr. Smith has outlined a plan, one he often repeats. His plan is to have libertarians move into positions of governance in order to take control of key systems and then abolish them eventually, in hopes that we eventually get to some kind of anarcho-capitalist society over time. He says this because, quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good. This means, of course, that because a thing isn't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't move to what's better, even if what's better isn't perfect. So that the audience knows, this is also the exact plan of socialists. They also want to seize government institutions, abolishing power over time, in order to end up with a stateless society, just like Dave wants. It's amusing to note that ultimately what both sides are really fighting over is the power of the state and the use of its force. It's hilarious to me that Christians have fallen for any libertarian dogma at all. We have every right to rule as much as the secularists, and the right to wield state power how we see fit to exercise our will, just as the libertarian Mr. Smith wants to do himself, and as the socialist wants to.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith definitely can't
Mr.
argue
Anderson.
we shouldn't. As if traditional Christians were in power, society would certainly be better than it is now. And, well, if it's not perfect, well, perfection is the enemy of the good. Christian ethics is a superior system of justification, starting points, which reject libertarian axioms, including that of self-ownership, on which the non-aggression principle must base itself. I'd like to see Dave demonstrate for us that self-ownership is true. I'm willing to be convinced, but thus far I most certainly am not. I'd like him to finally clarify his oughts and if incest ought be allowed, if it isn't reproductive, if homosexual marriage ought be allowed, if polygamous marriages ought be allowed, and if unaliving yourself ought be allowed. Anytime in the past.
This is interesting because, well, anyway, sometimes I think that a lot of the anarchist movement, the modern anarchist movement, they're really just libertarians. They're not really anarchists. They just think that's a cool word. So you can learn a lot about debating or potentially debating an anarchist from watching a libertarian debate. So they're going to have a lot of the same points. An anarchist is just a more extreme libertarian, a more radical one. But most of these people who claim that they're in like some group or movement or party or whatever, like they really don't know anything about politics. Now I'm not talking about Dave Smith, but I'm talking about people on the internet in general. When they say they're an anarchist, they really don't know what anarchy is. Or when they say they're conservative, but they're actually a libertarian producer. They'll say they're an anarchist, but they're actually a libertarian. They'll say they're a Democrat, but they're actually a commie. So you can get a lot from this from the libertarians about how to talk to an anarchist.
I have seen Dave pushed on these odd claims. He's somewhat evasive and dodgy. And I think it's time to get clear positions and note what he actually does want in society, not as preferences go, but as his ought of self-ownership demand people be allowed to do with no evasion.
This is going to be long, so I'm probably not going to get through the whole thing.
You do believe prostitutes ought to be able to,
I'm going to have to leave.
Be prostitutes if they want. That
I was
those
on
who
the
want
call
to
with
alive
Nick,
ought to be able to do that. That polygamists ought to be able to marry.
I was on hold for like 20 minutes,
that Skittles
and
people
I had
ought
to
to be able
start
to
the
get
show
married.
and
That drug
listen to
use
the
ought to
debate.
be legal regardless of the drug. I'd like to get into these distinct philosophies. I think that's enough for us to start with. And with that, I'll yield my time to Dave.
I've been trying to call Nick for like 2 weeks. And either last week the show ended. This week I was on hold too long and the debate started, and I'm not going to miss this debate. Been trying to ask him about Horizon Air Q400 and if he could do a show where he like reenacts that would be pretty cool. And then also I was going to ask him about the Malaysian footage that has come out, the Malaysian Airlines flight footage of it zapping out of existence after being swarmed by some orbs. And if he thinks that's real, if he's seen it, what his pilot analysis would be of that. But I can't sit on hold all night. I ain't got no time for that.
Okay. All right, Dave, whenever you're ready,
Hola,
go ahead. You got up to 7 minutes.
Sure. So as I said,
Dave is smart.
I'll make my opening a bit of a response to yours because I'm just meeting you guys tonight and I didn't exactly know what I was in for, but I will.
This is a big debate for Andrew because Dave just debated Chris Cuomo on PBD. Dave's been on Joe Rogan's show like twice. He went on Joe Rogan's show 2 days in a row, which I don't know if anybody else has ever done that. So this is a big name that Andrew's debating right now. It's going to be a tough one for him. My mom is in OWN and I being away from the internet. I want to say hi and remind you how handsome you are. My mom is in OWN. I don't know what that means.
Say that
town. Your mom is in town.
I know, Andrew. I have seen on Twitter you in your bio you refer to yourself as a paleoconservative, and that I would just say. Sorry, were you going to say something? Oh no, sorry. I would just say that I'm very interested in the re-energizing of that term, and that there are people who consider themselves paleoconservatives today. I'm a big
So Dave doesn't have a prepared opening. I don't know if he's taking this seriously. He's just winging his intro.
Let's just say I was very influenced, and I've read a lot of paleoconservative thinkers, Paul Gottfried, Pat Buchanan, Sam Francis, guys like this. One of the things that I think was great about all of those guys was that they all, the term paleoconservative actually came from hearkening back to the old right, which were a group of anti-statist right-wingers back who were, fighting the New Deal and fighting keeping America out of World War I and out of World War II.
They're monarchs.
I would just say in response to some of the things you said there, the idea of libertarianism and self-ownership does not at all imply that anyone is allowed to do whatever they want to do. And it certainly doesn't imply that you can't say something as horrifically immoral, even if it doesn't violate the principle of self-ownership. Certainly property rights would be a great example of where someone wouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want to do if they were on someone else's property who didn't wish to allow them to do that. I think that a lot of the later stuff we probably have to get into in the back and forth and when we're asking each other questions. I think there are lots of examples of degeneracy that you could bring up and ask whether I think we ought to be allowed to do them or not, the question to me isn't so much whether we ought to be allowed to do them. It's how society ought to treat them and what exactly has led us to the point where these awful things are so celebrated. So I'm sure there'll be more time to get into all of these things, but I would just say that I think,
and leftism,
from what I'm hearing at the beginning here, there's a big misunderstanding of what exactly it is I stand for, and also what kind of the tradition of resisting centralized authoritarian control
address the drug
is really
thing.
all about.
You want to legalize
but
drugs.
I'm happy to talk more about this.
All right.
Yeah, he's winging
Opening
it.
statement's done. So I'm going to try to stay out of it as much as possible. We'll let you two go back and forth. You only hear from me if the audience can't hear because there's too much talking over each other. Other than that, we've got about an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes. You guys go ahead.
Oh, we might be able to get through all this.
Can you demonstrate for us how you own yourself?
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Do you own yourself?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate that?
I mean, I'm demonstrating. We're both demonstrating it right now on this show.
Well, you're not demonstrating that you own yourself.
What do you mean by own?
Well, I think that ownership of a thing is just a social construction. That ownership itself is just a parameter of agreed upon criteria.
Oh, okay, but if you were
hang on, let me finish the point.
Sure.
For which that's how we know. So I own that guitar because we agree that I own that guitar. That's it. That's the only reason I own it. I don't think that there's anything which is that you can point to that would demonstrate that this exists outside of a social construction we agree to.
Okay. Well, I'm missing your point here.
My point is that I think it's a social construction when you say that you own yourself. I don't think that
I didn't say it's not a social construction. But
well, then you don't own yourself?
That's a false binary. I'm not. Hold on one second. Listen,
No. That's a law of logic. You either do or you don't.
No, I didn't say. No, you're asking me if I do or I don't. Do you own that guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, but you just said it's a social construct.
Yeah, but I gave you the criteria for the social construct would be an agreement of.
And I said I own myself.
Right, but when you say
so, as much as you own that guitar, you've proved
this is
nothing.
incorrect. When I say, "Do you own yourself?" and you say, "I'm not sure," law of logic would.
No.
Hang on, let me finish.
I said yes.
Yeah, the law of excluded middle is going to show this. It can only be yes or no. Do you have self-ownership? Yes or no. I own the guitar because we agree we do. Do you only own yourself because we agree you do?
Well, I don't agree that that's what ownership means, but you said yes and I said yes, so we're both exactly even.
Well, then I want to know I want to know how you own yourself.
Well, look, if you actually look up ownership in like a dictionary, I think the definition that you gave would be a little bit different than that. So, do I exercise my control over myself? Do I do so morally? Yes, I think so. And I actually think that in order for us to even have this conversation, we both have in a sense agreed to that principle.
I don't think we have.
It's me versus you.
How have we
do you
agreed?
Own the arguments that you're making so far in this conversation?
You don't. How do you own an argument?
No, I mean, when I say that, I mean, is it yours? Are
it came out of my mouth? Sure.
Are the words you're saying yours?
But how would that?
I don't know if Dave's even going to stick around long for this. Come on, Andrew.
Make the application that I own that thing.
Well, look, again, define own.
I think that the definition of ownership would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself. Sure.
But he doesn't agree to.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay,
because if the social,
what did we just do this whole time?
Let me explain. Because if the social construction, what if we change the social construct and we decide that you can own a person, Dave?
Right. Okay. And what if we change the social construct and says I own your guitar and I own you? What are you?
That's exactly right.
That's
what if we change the social construction of ownership to mean you?
So Andrew's saying he doesn't agree with your social construction that you own yourself.
Can own a person. Does that mean that people no longer own themselves?
Well, the difference here, right, is that, and it's the word that I mentioned that you didn't, is that I would say that ownership would imply that you're justified in that claim.
How are you justified in that claim?
How am I justified in the claim of owning myself?
Yeah, you just said if you agreed it's a social construction. So if we agree that it's a social construction, then we can own other people as via social construction. That would be justified.
Let's get to the pot. Let's get to legalizing drugs.
The major difference there, right, is that as we're having this conversation, and clearly what's the goal here? To persuade, probably not to persuade each other, but at least to persuade the audience who's listening to us. Because we recognize that they are in control. Forget the word own, because that's triggering, evidently. But they are
not triggered by the word.
Oh, God. Never mind. I'm not going to play that.
Word own.
Okay. When I say triggering, meaning that's going to start a whole nother debate about semantics. So
yeah, but semantics are important in a debate.
Okay, well, all right. Let's not do this tactic of interrupting every 2 seconds. So let me just finish my point here. So we are both presuming that the people who are listening to this are in control of their own thoughts, and we could potentially persuade them toward our cause. And so if we're doing all of this, we kind of are recognizing in some sense that it's more valuable to persuade people than it is to, I don't know, just enforce our will on them. And so in that sense, I would say that, yes, there is some kind of norm that there's a justifiable path where you can persuade people versus force them.
Sure. Well, I agree that you can persuade all sorts of people and that can be part of a societal norm and that everybody can agree that that's part of a societal norm. That does not demonstrate that you own yourself. Thus, the key principle for the non-aggression principle, which is self-ownership, that's where the violation comes in. Do people own themselves? Is that a justified position or isn't it?
I'm saying that, yes, I think it is. But again,
then can you demonstrate it?
Well, what would you mean by that? What would it mean to demonstrate that you own yourself?
You would have to prove that you own yourself.
That I can control myself, or what? Again, just be clear about what you're asking.
Well, here, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example to the contrary. I have seen throughout all of human history that human beings seem to be able to own other human beings without much problem. That doesn't seem to be a problem. As long as the social construction of ownership of the time states that you can own another person, you seem to be able to just fine.
Right.
So this axiom of self-ownership is not obvious to me. To be an axiom, it has to be self-apparent and self-obvious.
So what demonstrated that people owned other people throughout time? Prove that to me. The same way you just said to me, prove to me that I own myself.
But I did.
No. Hold on.
I'll prove it to you again.
Well, hold on. Let's try to not. We're only a couple minutes.
You interrupted me. I didn't interrupt you.
Well, hold on. You just asked me to prove that I own myself, and then you asserted that throughout history people owned other people. So prove that.
Yeah, but we already did, and let me explain how. You and I already agreed that ownership is a social construction. And that throughout history, the social construction had changed where people were able to own other people via the social construct. So whatever the social construct is of the day, that's all it is. As long as you agree that ownership is a social construction, you basically have to bite that bullet, right?
Wait, no, I'm not even understanding what you're saying here. So we agreed it was a social construct, and then your next statement after that was, prove to me that you own yourself.
Yeah, a social construction doesn't exist in objective reality.
Right.
It's a term.
Prove to me that anyone ever owned someone else throughout history. And all you said was it was a social construct as well.
You mean like a contract of ownership between slaves or something?
No, it's your question. So you tell me how to answer
my claim is that ownership is a social construction. Do you agree or disagree with that claim?
I think it is a social construct, but there also can be ethical and non-ethical or moral and immoral.
Well, then if you make the assertion that it's anything more than a social construction, then the burden of claim is on you to demonstrate how it could be.
Well, okay. I mean, again, you're dodging my question here. I asked you the same question you asked me, and you weren't able to answer it either.
I did answer it.
By the way, part of the reason why I asked is because I don't exactly understand the question you're asking me. Are you asking me to say why I think, how I could prove that it is moral that one person should own themselves rather than someone else own them? Is that
that's not the question. So here's the question. Let me explain it to you.
Okay.
The non-aggression principle itself revolves around the idea that human beings own themselves, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the thing is that you and I can agree that there's been tons and tons of slavery throughout human history, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those people clearly own these other people. So this has to be a social construction of agreement is what is ownership. We agree that you own it, therefore you own it. What I'm asking for is some type of justified evidence that that is not the case and that there is some moral ought or some type of demonstration philosophically or otherwise that a human being actually owns themselves.
Okay, so just to be clear here, if I were to say, if you're saying ownership meaning just strictly control over who has something, then yes, there have been lots of times where people can come just take all your stuff and then claim they own it. And if you're saying the law recognizes it or the society recognizes it, then essentially they own it. So
they can do that with people too, right?
Right. And in a sense, I agree with you. And that
so then you don't own yourself.
Okay. Let me just finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
Right.
This is not come on. This is they've spent so much time on this. Andrew, I don't know about this line here.
Dude, we got a long show here, so let's just let each other talk. So in a sense, I agree with you. Yes, you can take possession of something. I don't think anybody is arguing that, and I don't think it's a very impressive point to make that, yes, people can take possession of something, and that could be codified by law or society. What we're talking about is something slightly different, which is justified ownership over something. So then the claim is like whether it's morally right that you own this or not. Fair enough. And I'm sure there's lots of
I'm just looking
areas,
for the demonstration of what is morally right. Sure.
Well, okay. If you're looking for the demonstration of what is morally right, I'm sure there's lots of areas where you would believe something is morally right and something else is wrong. And the demonstration of it would be what? That this is what you believe. This is what seems to be right and wrong. This is what has been accepted. And
no, my justification would be divine command, not seemings or phenomenal conservatism.
Okay,
which is what seemings are.
So okay, but so divine command. So what? And how would you exactly determine what is and isn't divine command?
Well, let's assume for a second that I was, I don't know, like delirious, right? And just thought I talked to God, and He gave me commands, right? If it's just preference, if we're just going off of preference, just things which Dave prefers are true, and Dave just prefers that you own yourself because he does, then any preference that I came up with in this delirious state where God was speaking directly to me would be just as valid as whatever preferences that you just axiomatically come to because you just want them to be true. My claim here is that libertarianism at its foundation, at its fundamental foundation, is flawed because this axiom of self-ownership isn't actually true, but rather a social construction which is asserted as though it is a truism when it clearly is not. So it's a fundamental.
Whereas Christian nationalism or anything with Christian in it, theocracy, our ownership is through God, which some people would complain or some people would argue back, well, that's just a social construct too. But we would argue, no, it's not a social construct. It's above social constructs. It's a hierarchy of value, and God is above society. So we believe in objective morality and objective truth. It's not everybody's truth. It's not everybody gets to decide what to do in their own life and what's right and what's wrong for them. There's one truth, and there is one true owner of everything. Well, you're either owned by God or you're owned by Satan. And even if you're owned by Satan, God owns Satan. So you're still owned by God. He's just kind of pushed you to the side.
Flaw. The reason that you guys come up with such absurd conclusions like that prostitution ought to be legal and all these other things is, and by the way, Dave, you have to end up with that. Otherwise, people don't own themselves. Do you think the state should come in and stop your brother from unaliving himself, for instance? Do you think that they should do that?
Is that
well, hold on. All right. Stick with your point that you were making at first, because you're just jumping all around here.
Well, no, I'm not.
If his brother really unalived himself and he didn't bring that up in the debate, then that's kind of, unless he's just making an example, because Andrew will use some extreme examples, but If his brother actually unalived himself, that's kind of fucked up. You're not owned by Satan. Right. That's kind of what I was saying, Matthew, is that, well, I mean, Satan is Satan becomes your father. Your father is Satan, child of Satan, children of Satan. And so I don't know. I think that's, I kind of know what you're saying, but also, in a way, Satan has dominion over the earth, and you're a child of Satan. So in a way, you are owned by Satan. You're going to spend eternity with him. There's a conversation to be had there.
That's the first thing you were saying.
Well, I already gave you the point. I'm saying I reject your axiom.
Though.
I reject the axiom of self-ownership until otherwise demonstrated. That's my point.
Okay, so what would you, so you're saying that if I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the first part that you're saying here because I'm not getting it at all.
Yeah.
So you're saying if somebody hallucinated that something was right and wrong and it was horrifically not right and wrong, that somehow that disproves the idea that anything is right or wrong?
If it's only axiomatic and based on preference, it would be just as valid. So how do you
determine if anything is morally right or wrong?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But in that analogy, the adopted child, the father has no ownership. You know, it's like the father has no ownership of the child. The father has no dominion over the child. If the kid is adopted by another parent, the true biological father can't just show up one day, be like, I want to take my kid to the park. No. That's your family now. You're owned by them legally. But I know what you're saying.
From a preference base, you couldn't.
Okay, so how do you determine that anything is morally right or wrong?
I do it from divine command. You do it from preference. I'm
no, you do it from divine command. What does that mean? Explain that.
So this means that I follow Christian ethics. I use transcendental categories inside philosophy to create justifications for the values which come from God's laws. That's what I do.
That's a lot of words to not say anything. How do you determine?
Do you know what transcendental?
Right,
do you know what transcendental categories are?
I don't understand the words.
It sounds like you don't understand.
Okay, explain it to me like I'm really stupid. I don't understand any of the words. So explain it to me. How do you determine if something is right and wrong?
Okay, so what I would do to make these determinations is we start with objective versus subjective. Is it a subjective value or is it an objective value? If we start with it just being a subjective value, then who cares? We never need to go any further than that.
Right.
We just never need to go any further for justification. So what I've determined is that your values here,
nobody can say anybody's right or wrong.
Value based. Therefore, there's never a reason for me to justify anything objectively to you because any subjective preference I have is just as valid.
You're not answering my question.
Literally, that's the most precise answer you could ever get.
Andrew,
if you're
how do you determine?
I just told you through divine command.
And then I asked you what that means, and you said
I just
nothing.
Explained.
No, you.
The simple answer is because God said so. And now, of course, if you're a godless person, you're going to say, well, I don't believe in your God, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's fine. You're objectively wrong.
Yeah,
you just said that you think my basis is subjective.
Okay, fine, Dave. I'll make it super simple because God tells me so. Is
there
that better for you?
Yeah.
Sure. No, okay. That's the answer. That's the answer.
That is the answer. God said so.
Yeah.
And through what means does God tell you this?
He directly communicates right into my brain. He's like, that shit's wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
True.
All right.
True.
So just to be clear,
more like into our heart, into our soul.
Is that Andrew?
Our brain will deceive
very
us.
Good when you attack someone and say that's subjective. But when your response to that is God communicates directly into my brain, that also, I mean, I don't know.
He was being facetious when he said that, Dave. But basically, it's written in our heart would be the Christian way to say it. Like he was being facetious for the sake of the argument.
What the word is for that?
Subjective.
But
it would be subjective.
Would probably be the word.
But that's my whole point. That's how I'm granting your entire argument. It's like it doesn't matter ultimately objectively.
But your counter is also subjective. So
right. So then that means that my preference is no worse than your own preference.
Well, I mean, no, it means by your argument we're even.
Yeah. If I'm using preference-based, if I'm using preference-based arguments, or I'm sorry, preference-based morality, and you're using preference-based morality,
listen,
neither of us can be right or wrong.
We're equal, Dave.
To be clear, I don't think I am.
There's no point in debating
preference-based
anything.
morality.
Got it. So
But
can you
That's
make
what he's
justification then?
saying.
1
Dave.
second. Let me try to finish the sentence here. I don't think I am making subjective-based morality, but you accused me of that, and so my response to you is,
agreed
so
to it.
what's your objective base? And your response is, God talks to me directly into my head.
Yeah,
Yes.
for the purpose of demonstration.
All right. By the way, God also talks to me in my head, and so
Perfect.
All right, fine. Like,
Yeah.
All right.
So if God
by
talks,
your own standard,
there you go.
You haven't won anything. By your own standard, we're even.
It's not here to win
By
it.
the way,
It's here to demonstrate
I
it,
want to
Dave.
try to let's try if we can, because we're only a few minutes into this. Let's try. This got more contentious than I thought it would in the first few minutes. Let's try to just, by the way, because I want to have a good conversation with you.
But their
and I've been told by
God
people who I
is-
love
their-
and trust, that you were a guy to have a good.
The problem is that their God, their idea of God was given to them by a prophet who was not such a good guy. I've heard some nice things about Muhammad from some like what's it called, apologist, some like Muslim apologist guy. He was a white guy, an American or a British white guy. He's like studied Muslim history and stuff, and he was being real nice about Muhammad, but he left out a few key details that oh no.
Conversation.
Yeah, but you keep on evading every question that I have for you.
Oh, all right. I don't think I have, but
So
okay.
let's answer.
Ask me a direct question.
Great.
I'm happy to answer.
Should the
it.
state come in and stop your brother from unaliving himself or not, Dave?
I would want them to. Yes.
Yes. Would you want the state to stop a man from having sex with his sister if it would lead to a non-reproductive
Jesus
act?
Christ. Wait, if it would lead to a non-reproductive act?
Yeah, she has no uterus.
But that
Yeah.
was supposed to be worse than if it would reproduce?
Yeah, it would be worse. It would be less
I'm
worse.
just saying that seemed like an unnecessary.
Because if they could reproduce, you could argue that the baby might suffer harm because of some sort of mutation or something. So the reason he took that out of the equation is to get rid of that argument.
Necessary caveat to throw on there, but okay. Wait, Jesus Christ. What you're talking about, like adults or children?
Adults
doing
Okay,
incest.
fine. Because for children, obviously, that'd be yeah, I guess I would want them to.
Okay, so you want the state to utilize authority?
Well,
Just
not
go
just
to
the
drugs.
state. I would want anyone.
Okay,
Stop that.
so I don't
Anyone
understand.
with the force to do it, or
Great.
anyone with the strength to do it.
So then those people don't own themselves.
No, I don't think that's the conclusion.
Well, if they own themselves, can you demonstrate what they're doing wrong?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
But that's a very silly and very look, this is a very like childish interpretation of libertarianism.
You're still not answering the question. You're just prattling.
No. I did. I immediately answered the question, and now I'm responding to the point you made. So I immediately said, yes, anyone with the authority to do it, please stop, or the power to do it, please stop. And then I was responding to what you said. So I did answer the question. What I'm saying is that the idea that if you own yourself, and this is the fundamental mistake that you made at the beginning, therefore I can't say anything is immoral, is ridiculous. And not only in the libertarian worldview, but in any worldview, there are lots of things, I'm sure in yours, where there could be things that you don't think are illegal, but you still, or you don't think should be illegal, but you still think are wrong. So that doesn't mean anything. If I think people own themselves, I can't think there's something horribly wrong about this.
That's not the point. So I'll explain again.
How much do y'all bet at some point he says, I bet you some Christians would say you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. I bet you that comes up.
Sure. So please.
If you want the state to go in, if a brother is banging his sister and she can't reproduce,
oh my God!
I don't know how you can demonstrate.
Why does reproducing matter in this?
There's a reason.
I'll explain why, so that you can't bank on reproduction as being a harm because it could have like some kid who's all fucked up. So I'm just taking that out of the equation.
Okay. I gotcha.
I'm just taking that out of the equation, right? She has no uterus. They can't reproduce, or maybe they're homosexuals, right? And they're just related. if they own themselves and they're adults,
This is live, by the way, so there's no way I pre-watched this. So
that is exactly what you would make the argument for gay marriage. They're adults. These adults are consenting with each other. Can you actually justify why that's wrong?
Sure.
Then justify why it's wrong.
Well, I can justify why it's wrong. Okay, there's two separate questions here.
well, it's not quite
And
live
this
because
is
I'm
almost
pausing.
like I think what you need to pick apart. So, look, there's two questions. One is, could I justify someone using force to stop them? And then could I justify why it's wrong? You get where those are two different things?
Yeah, I'm just asking why it's wrong.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
But
so let's do that.
Okay. Do you get why those are two different things, though? You get the point I'm making?
Yeah, sure.
yes.
So can you answer the question now?
Yeah, dude. Listen, man. Do you want to have a decent back and forth here, or
Yeah, I don't
do you
know
want
if
to
Dave's
not?
gonna.
You're still
keep
not
this
answering the
up.
question.
Dave's a busy
Okay.
guy.
Can you justify why it's
Ooh,
actually
he might
wrong
be-
for
he
two
might be
consenting
leaving.
adults?
Yeah. See, the thing is, I am answering the question. You're just kind of being a dick
Well, when
and trying to
you-
win the debate.
When are
rather
you
than
going to
having a
answer the
conversation.
question, Dave?
All right, give him a chance.
So is
Andrew.
that
Go ahead.
actually
Yeah,
does
Andrew, you
anyone
do gotta-
listening to this think this makes for good debate tactics? No, you actually are not recognizing that there's a difference between these two things. So
His point is good, but they've gone on too long. Andrew's kind of got to loosen up and move on, table it, and move on to the next thing. Just talk about drugs or stop using these really extreme examples.
I just told you I do.
Let's leave him.
all right,
finish.
do you guys
Let's
want to
leave
do
Dave
this,
answer.
man? I fucking honestly, dude. This is
You've
just
we've talked way more than I have, Dave. I just want you to answer my question.
I
Can
don't
you
know about
justify
that.
it or not, bro?
Dave's not going to
Okay.
do this.
So anyway, I'll go back to saying, do you guys want to do this? Do you guys want to do a
Bro, Dave was just on PBD, Joe Rogan 2 times. Dave's not going to do this if this keeps going like this. You gotta chill out, Andrew. You gotta have a back and forth. Let him talk. Let him get a point out, an idea out, and then then just slow it down, Andrew. Slow it down.
show here, or what's the point of this?
You wanted?
you
I
can
asked
say
you specifically if you
Right,
wanted a
right. You could
conversation or
say-
debate.
you
You
could
said a
say-
debate. We're debating.
No. I didn't say that. I said
did say
we
that.
could do whatever you want to do, dude.
Yeah, so we're doing a debate.
Right.
So
but
let's
this-
not do a meta
Yeah, but a
conversation.
debate
Just
doesn't
answer the
mean-
question.
A debate
Okay.
doesn't mean you talk over me every time I try to
Because
answer.
I
Here's
just
what we're
want you to
gonna do.
answer the
Here's-
question.
here's what
No,
we're gonna
I
do.
understand
Let's
you do,
leave-
and I was, but you're
Dave,
just.
one second.
Andrew likes the blood sports. Andrew likes the back and forth. Da 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 da. Instead of the more official, organized, and that's just his style. But a lot of people kind of just aren't going to put up with it.
Second, here's what we're
Sure.
gonna do. Dave can expound here on what he thinks is occurring.
Andrew
here in this
Wilson.
debate, and then before you come back in, Andrew, we'll give Dave a chance to
Okay.
specifically answer the question that you've asked. So Dave's gonna do two things here. He's going to
Ask
This is Andrew Wilson from the Crucible. They've been blowing up lately. They were always grinding, and he's always been a fierce competitor in the debate arenas. But he's been blowing up lately. He went from I think they were at 14,000 subscribers, and now they're almost at 100,000 in the past couple of months. He's been on a lot of shows lately. But Dave Smith, I would argue, is the much larger. I don't know how many subscribers he has on his show or whatever, but he's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on a lot of big shows, making big appearances like Pierce Morgan, Joe Rogan, Patrick Bet-David. So I think Dave's getting a little irritated by Andrew's tactics.
me the question again. I'm sorry.
Can you justify why two consenting adults who are brother and sister
Right,
having sex
Matthew.
is morally wrong?
Right.
Yes.
Then do
I
it.
want him to just go to the drugs.
because I think it's
Go to
for the
legalizing
same
drugs.
reason you would think.
That's
I
a
think it's
realistic
against nature,
libertarian
it's
position.
Evil. It just
And it's
seems
easily
horrible.
debunkable.
I don't know. Do you have a better answer for why it's wrong?
Well, yes, divine command.
Divine command. Okay, fine. So I also say divine command. That's why it's wrong.
Well, but
There
then
you go.
the axiom of self-ownership would be wrong.
Now
No,
how did
it
he-
wouldn't.
becomes-
No, it
well,
wouldn't.
now the
And if
debate
you had
becomes,
listened to me
is your
when I
God
was
so
responding
my
the
God
first
right?
time, you would understand.
Well, here,
that.
let me now make my argument back.
Yeah,
if they
right,
don't,
right.
if they don't own themselves, right? Or if they do own themselves, rather, and they're two consenting adults, just like two homosexuals consenting adults, why is it actually wrong for them to do that? You say because it seems like it's against nature, which isn't the natural fallacy. Couldn't I just apply that to homosexuals as well and say, well, it
You
seems
saw
like
that,
it's against
Daddy
nature?
Yeah, sure. Maybe you could.
And do you think?
And to be honest, when Wes was freaking out, him and Jim Bob didn't really have any good comebacks. They didn't have any really good witty comebacks or anything like that. It was more just Wes embarrassing himself. Like they really didn't do anything good to rebuttal Wes. Like if it was me, I would have stood. When Wes was yelling at me like that, I would have stood up and said, "What's up?" And then it would have been a roast battle back and forth. I would have been going at him, at his throat, you know. But they just kind of sat there and was just like, yeah, well, no, that's dumb. You went to jail." Really, Wes just embarrassed himself.
So your moral oughts are based around just things that gross you out?
No, divine intervention, bro.
But in retrospect, over the last month since that's happened, Jim Bob and Andrew have been destroying West on their shows. They didn't really destroy him on the stage. He destroyed himself. He looked like an idiot on his own. But on their shows, they've been making songs about West. They've been Jim Bob had a 4-hour stream where he just roasted Wes Watson, and he was doing a Wes Watson impression. And he's like, look at this guy. He just yells randomly. And he's like, imagine this guy was a produce farmer. And he's like, I'm growing all this lettuce, but then sometimes the lettuce doesn't grow, and I just want it to grow. It was so funny. I was at work listening, just laughing my ass off. People looking at me like I was crazy. Anyway.
Divine command?
Yeah, there you go.
So if it's divine command, then you're going to abandon libertarianism and you're going to come over to Christian ethics, right?
No.
No,
he has a different.
But I thought you made your justification based
so
on
now
divine
the debate,
command.
Now the debate is whose God is better.
Listen, it's clear that
Great
Dave,
point, dude. You're right. You have divine command, and you're asking me why it's wrong for a brother to fuck a sister. Listen, dude. I know, I don't know anything about you. I don't know why Jacob thought this was going to be a good idea. I know you dominate 20-year-old OnlyFans sluts in debates.
I also dominate 45-year-old comedians in debates. What's your point?
41, motherfucker. And listen, and no, you're really not, though. You're asking questions about why it's wrong for a brother to fuck a sister. Oh, okay. I don't know, because I think it's wrong, and yes, awful. And also, do I think
it's a transcendental argument, which is like a Jay Dyer. It's an orthodox Christian debating tactic, and it's useful, and it's a good tactic, and it works to an extent. You can't turn the whole debate into that. There's a lot of practical and good things they could be talking about right now.
That the government, if we're talking about adults, is it being outlawed going to be a great way to regulate that? Probably not. What even is your vision? I mean, this is the dumbest fucking question to get into what the role of government ought to be. Yes, you're right. If the FBI is breaking in and stopping
he is a comedian, but I don't know if he's funny.
28-year-old brothers and sisters from having sex with each other, that's okay. We
but
need
they
the
do that.
government to do
Just
that.
so you know, they do that right now. Are you opposed to it? They actually arrest people for doing this, and they drag them off to jail, and they put them in jail for doing that.
I'm not nearly as aware of this as you are, Andrew, but I'm not going to fight against that law.
Yeah, but here's the thing then. What I don't understand is that if the argument for self-ownership is that consenting adults can do whatever it is they want to do, because they're consenting adults are not hurting anybody else, this would be a violation of the non-aggression principle.
If he was that funny, he wouldn't be
a brother and a sister engage in this.
He wouldn't be a
libertarian
political
land.
pundit.
Why couldn't they? Why shouldn't they be able to? Honestly.
Sure. Well, why shouldn't they do it is for moral reasons. I suppose you could make an argument that if people really do have freedom, then a grown,
I'm going to speed it up a little bit.
Grown adults who are related
and
should
stop
not
pausing
be
as
banned
much
by law and should not have a cop bash him over the head with a baton for having sex with a cousin or something. Okay, but you're taking this to this weird extreme example where
that happens now.
Oh, sure. Okay. Anyway, So you're taking this to a weird extreme example where, okay, let's take it to the other extreme and say, do you believe that the government should rush into your house anytime you're doing anything where they
No, he already couched that
or not
that
moral
argument.
or productive?
He said
You're smoking
that,
a cigarette right now. Is that enough of a reason for someone to come get?
Ding, 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 ding. Who said at 15 minutes in, or however long it's been, who said 1 hour in that the cigarettes will be brought up? Ding, ding, ding.
You like, would there be any realm where you would say, maybe the government shouldn't be regulating every inch of what I determine from divine, whatever that is moral or immoral?
Yeah. So
no, Andrew already couched the argument about hurting their potential offspring. He said in this hypothetical, the girl has no uterus. So
actually, this makes my point for me. This is great. So the reason that I just go ahead and concede a lot of these points, because there's no real reason to fight them. For instance, if you agree with me that the only justification that you can have is that, well, because God told you it's gross, and so therefore you ought to not do it, then this would mean that you agree with me in divine command and should be a Christian ethicist. That's why that's done. That's why I just make it super easy for you to go ahead and agree. And you did. You agreed. Absent. So I'm just going to ask this straight out. Okay. And no, I don't believe in that sort of government overreach. And I can give you my systems and reasons for why that is too under Christian ethics, where we both take into account consequence, but also take into account duty. So I'm going to ask this: absent any kind of divine command, God didn't tell you anything. Would you say that it's not moral? And can you justify why it's not moral for a brother to hump his sister? Could you do that absent divine command? Like, honest question, Dave. This is super important.
Sure. So I would say this, right? I grew up an atheist. Well, I mean, I'm Jewish, but I grew up like not a religious person. It was just, kind of what I was born into. And I was pretty much an atheist for most of my life. And then I had some experiences as I became a young adult that made me think about God and kind of get in touch with him. And then it was really when I had my first child that I really found God. So I would agree with you that yes, there is something from God that instructs me as to what is right and wrong in this world.
Sure.
However, but before I ever believed in God, yeah, there was just a deep feeling inside of me that would have been very wrong. And I do believe that was always from God. So
okay.
I don't know.
Then absent God.
What that proves.
So then absent God.
Nothing in this argument.
Yeah. No, it does though. And I'm going to explain how. Because you're saying that absent God is just your preferences. It's just how you feel.
No,
that's what makes what's moral or not moral. Then what would make it immoral? Absent God.
In the Bible?
Here's the thing, dude, Andrew, I think you're doing a thing here.
Yeah. In Deuteronomy, I think they addressed that. Well, there was a lot of incest because they had to populate. So, but it's in one of the Mosaic books, maybe Leviticus, somewhere in there. Once the population got big enough, they're like, okay, we don't have to do it with our sisters and cousins anymore. We need to stop that. But for the sake of population, they were doing that. They had to. And that comes from any worldview. It doesn't matter if you believe in evolution. It doesn't matter what worldview you hold. In the beginning, there would have had to been one male and one female, and there would have had to been incest. No matter, even if you're an atheist, Darwinist, evolutionist, naturalist, they all include incest in the beginning because there was only one male and one female. Unless you believe a whole population of humans just cropped up at the exact same time, which is impossible.
That a lot of like internet blood sport debaters try to do, which is that you're trying to win before you're actually listening to what I'm saying.
I can steel man the entire thing.
Try to listen to what I actually said and grapple with that. What I said was not.
Did he actually raid me? No, he didn't. I think I have to give permissions for that. I would give him permission for that.
Before I believed in God, it was just subjective.
I was trying to call Nick earlier, but I was on hold for too long, and I had to start the show.
That was always God.
So to steel man,
that's a very different thing than what you said. Right?
Sure. So I'll just steel man the position. The position, to make sure I don't get this wrong at all, is that you believe that there was some type of natural law given to you by God before you ever even believed in God, correct?
Yeah, that's
great. So I steel man the position. So to my question,
we do need to populate. We do need to have some more babies, but we have enough people. We don't need to justify some of that action.
Which you didn't actually answer.
Sure.
Which is this. Absent God, if there was no God, could you justify why this would be immoral or not?
Yeah, I don't know that you could. I think absent God, it's very difficult to arrive at morality.
Right. So absent God, so you're a divine command as well, divine command theorist, just like myself. So
Sure.
if that's true and you're a divine command theorist, and we have now shown how self-ownership leads to absurd conclusions like a brother being able to hump their sister.
No, but I disagree with it. Okay.
Well, okay, why can't, if you own yourself, why can't you hump your sister if she owns herself, Dave? That makes no sense.
What do you mean by why can't you? Why can't, if you don't own yourself, why can't you hump your sister? What does that mean?
Good question. But my point is, with the non-aggression principle, the entire axiom.
You're not asking
on the
anything,
same
dude.
Yeah, I am.
So let's just say this. And man, I wish you had picked an example that wasn't
legalizing
so fucking
drugs.
uncomfortable to talk about. But here,
What'd I miss?
So you, Andrew, don't own yourself. Why can't you just hump your sister?
You could.
Exactly. So what the hell are you asking? What's the question?
But that goes to my point. I think that if you actually have self-ownership as something more than an axiom, meaning it's justified somehow that you actually do own yourself. It's not just.
I don't know why he didn't just say because God. No, I can't do my sister because God owns me.
A social construction. Then you wouldn't be able to hump your sister if you did not own yourself, right?
What do you mean wouldn't be
but if
able
you do,
to?
But if you do own yourself, you can still hump your
Allowed.
sister. The point being,
Andrew, do you own yourself?
Under the current paradigm of the social construction, we would say yes.
Okay.
No, he means from your worldview.
And if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to hump your sister. I don't get.
No, you still
point.
could, but that is the point.
So that's it. So you still could. So what are you saying?
So let me try again.
Yeah,
just listen to what I'm saying, like I just did yours. In fact, maybe you can steel man this for me.
Okay,
maybe like I just did for you.
Let me listen
okay?
and I'll see if I can.
If Buff was here, I wish Buff was here so he could pay attention and learn what a straw man and a steel man is. But all Andrew had to say there is, no, I do not own myself. God owns me. That's why I can't bang my sister.
So my point is that self-ownership is why you should not be allowed to aggress against another person because they own themselves. Correct?
Trained? What do you train?
Okay.
Is that correct? Isn't that the basis of the NAP? You own you, I own me. That's why we cannot aggress against each other, correct?
Sure.
Okay, got it. And yet here we're both talking.
Yeah, I was on hold for 20 minutes. I'm trying to, he's doing a flight show, and I'm trying to give him relevant stories about the Malaysia flight being zapped out of the sky by some flying orbs, and if he thinks that footage is real, and also the Flight King. I want him to do a reenactment of the Flight King's flight path and see if he can barrel roll a Q400.
Talking about using state authority to aggress against people who own themselves, who aren't actually doing anything you can justify as being wrong outside of Christian ethics. And so the thing is that seems to dispel the NAP. Now, can you steel man that back to me?
Okay,
I know.
So you're saying that if we own ourselves and everybody and an act of aggression would be violating someone else's self-ownership, then it wouldn't be an act of aggression to kill yourself, incest amongst adults, things like this.
Right.
Okay. So
if that's true, and the only moral oughts that we have for why you shouldn't do this is through Christianity.
No, I didn't say no. By the way, I didn't say Christianity, but you said that. But
okay, fine. God, whatever the justified axiom is for God, for divine command. Okay,
sure.
If that's the only way that we can justify that this is immoral, then the idea that you owning yourself and two consenting adults owning themselves in anarcho-capitalist land can't be true, because you are willing to use and violate their self-ownership with aggression because you think they're doing something morally wrong, but you can't justify what they're doing that's morally wrong.
No, okay, so again, this is back what I was trying to say before, that I think there's these two things that need to be separated. So there's the moral.
So he said he's a Christian. Dave is a Christian. So I would get off of this argument and I would go to okay, well now if we're both Christians, why would you be a libertarian and not a Christian nationalist or a theocrat or a conservative? Why would you lean more libertarian? Why would you lean more do as thou wilt than authority and structure and hierarchy and patriarchy? Why would you lean more towards that if we're both Christians, And he would have to make some argument like what John was making with me the other night. God doesn't care about the rulership of this world, and government has nothing to do with God, and blah, 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 which is nonsense, which is absolute nonsense. It says that the powers and the rulers of this earth are determined by the powers and the principalities, which are the angels that God put into power, or the fallen demons. So we get the rulers we deserve if we're not actively doing things to put the right people they're going to be put in place anyway based off what we deserve. So if we're not doing right and we're not living right, then we're going to get a bunch of damn commies running our government that are going to run us into the ground and starve us to death. We should be actively working towards making our government better and having the government work for us and putting the right people into power. And then God will show favor to us, and he'll make sure we get the right king in place, the right man who is a man of God, who follows God, to run the government as God would want it to be ran. Duh.
Moral application of the initiation of violence, and then there's morality. And they're not exactly the same thing. And so if my neighbor, let's just say, my neighbor is not being a good husband and being a good father. Okay, so like let's say he's just very cold with his children and like doesn't pay the bills on time and doesn't work and is lazy and does all types of things that I judge to be morally wrong. Like I think he should be a better father and a better husband. But if I go over there and beat him over the head with a club to make him be a better husband and father, it's not as simple an equation as was he morally right or wrong. The question is it morally justified for me to enact this force against him in order to make, like, is that more moral or immoral than his initial sin? So that's the question that you get into when you start talking about government regulating a lot of these things. It's not as simple as you're making it.
There is a Christian anarchist movement, and it came really late in like the history of anarchy. And it's, other than American anarchism, it's Christian anarchy, I'd say, is the dumbest one. American anarchy is probably, and first wave anarchy, like, was it Godwin or Starner? One of those two's form of anarchy was very violent. And American anarchy was pretty violent. And it was just a bunch of dumb college kids who hated authority who would go around and destroy stuff.
It out that, well, if people own themselves, then it has to be morally justified, whatever they do.
Okay, so let's see if we can't parse this out. And again, I'll see if I can just steelman this with my criticism. So the thing is that I agree. We can look at scales, right? We can say that we can get to absurd conclusions if we were to say that there's no time or place to apply some sort of like aggression towards somebody, right? Otherwise, you would aggress on them for anything that you considered some kind of moral failure. And obviously, that's not what either of us are after. Sure. What I'm saying is that if we take it to its logical conclusion, libertarianism, which is what I said in my opening, as a consequence of itself, has to actually lead to degeneracy. And the reason is because if the idea here is that I own me and you own you, and if we consent to the two things we do together and it hurts nobody else, therefore not violating the non-aggression principle, which is the foundation for which this thing, revolves, then how can you make ever a claim against homosexuals getting married or against incest or against any of?
He's probably pro-gay marriage. You'd have to ask him. I'm sure he's probably pro-gay marriage.
These things. How can you possibly make that claim? That's the ultimate question.
Okay, so a couple things here. I don't think that's the ultimate question, and I do think that I could make the claim against that in the same way that you could. And I think we already established this, right? That we can both make the claim for the exact same reasons because we believe in God and we believe in morality and we believe that this is immoral. So we both have the exact same ability to make the claim. But if we're talking about what you're more
now, then why is your government structure a better idea than his government structure?
Leads to immorality, I think is completely wrong. And I think this is like kind of the most important
it's been shown
fundamental miscalculation that a lot of people on the right who reject libertarianism make. The idea that, well,
what happened when they legalized hard drugs in Washington or Oregon? One of those two. What happened? Overdose rates went up by 500% within a couple months. That's what happened.
Freedom and liberty is really what leads to degeneracy. And that's just not true. And in fact, empirically and logically, we can look at the situation, particularly the situation of the United States of America.
I'm sorry, not overdose rates. Death by overdose. The overdose rates probably went up thousands of %. But deaths by overdose deaths went up 500% within a matter of months when they legalized hard drugs.
And go look, as the government has grown bigger and bigger, you've seen degeneracy get more and more out of control. And I understand why there is a movement against degeneracy. I understand we live in a moment right now where I think our society is essentially disintegrating. And I think that that's one of the things that, Andrew, you kind of are, I don't know, prominent for pointing out. the disintegration of values and norms all
Yeah,
throughout.
but the reason I believe
we have a
that
bunch
those
of
values and
children
norms are being
who are
eroded
mad at
is
authority.
because of libertarians and social leftist elites who often will move towards this principle of non-aggression. They just do it in two different ways. The way one, which libertarian does it, is by saying, if I'm not violating you and your non-aggression principle in some way, then you really have no claim to tell me to do anything, and everything is affirmed through private property. The left,
He's gonna bring up necrophilia. He always does. He always does. It's so funny. I love it because that doesn't harm anybody. There's no harm. It doesn't break the no harm principle.
it just affirms it the opposite direction, says there's no such thing as private property, but they apply the same principle of, if I'm not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? And so as we dive into what is the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression principle is the principle that if you are not aggressing against somebody else and you own yourself, they cannot aggress against you. So via consent, you cannot utilize the state, Dave, to have them go and break up an incest family who is all consenting with each other and having orgies nightly. You can't do it.
I understand that's your perspective on this, but that has nothing to do with what I'm getting into. So actually what the non-aggression principle implies is that at best, government ought to be severely restricted, and at worst, government ought to not exist at all. Now, as we've had the rise in government, and I mean, look, in the United States of America, just in the last 20 years, in the last 20 plus years, which we could go back a lot further than that, you've had a tremendous growth in the size of government. And what happens as the government gets bigger and bigger is that all of the things that Christians and traditionalists tend to value get undermined. And so
you got that from going to a private school and a good Christian mom and dad and going to church every week and having structure and having authority and having parents who love you and raised you right. That's what you got that from. And you got that from, you couldn't just pretend to be sick and get out of going to school. It was, oh, you got the sniffles? Here, take a Dayquil, eat some chicken noodle soup, have a cup of orange juice. Now get the heck to school.
This
lazy as hell. That's actually
that is inherently based on violating the non-aggression principle does its absolute best.
He was pretty lazy, huh? But he was making good money until like the economy went to crap in Florida. When he was doing construction sales, he was making like $200K a year. With an easy ass job, a salesman, he just all he did all day was play golf and freaking take people to lunch.
To replace, take over, and monopolize all of the areas where traditionally family and community had domain. And
yeah,
so
but why would that be problematic if the non-aggression principle logically should be ignored for these moral oughts? That's that is the question.
Well, hold on. That's a separate question. The point I'm making is that it's not an outgrowth of the non-aggression principle. It's an outgrowth of a rejection of the non-aggression principle. That's actually what leads to all of this.
So then if we were to have the non-aggression principle with a shrunken government, are we still going to use the government in order to aggress against consenting adults who want to have incest or not?
As long as a government exists, it will be used to aggress against non-consenting adults. And
great.
So, yes,
then
I don't know.
Yes.
Listen, Andrew, you're trying to obsess over this incest argument.
Bro, I could never skip school and hang out at home because he would just randomly show up all the time throughout the day and just like hang out. Like, what is your job? Go clean your car. He had the messiest damn car I've ever seen in my life. I was like, how do you find any paperwork in here? It's all paperwork. There's stuff everywhere. It's just like a mountain of file folders. Nothing's organized. What a mess.
Okay, laws
foundational.
Laws against incest. I'll grant you that. Sure, fine. Can we move on to any other topic now?
Yeah, but
can we move on to talking about the state of the country as it actually exists?
Yeah, but this is the state of the country as it actually exists.
Well, hold on. It's pretty funny because we live under the most powerful centralized government in the history of the world. The biggest organization in the history of the world is the United States of America's federal government in Washington, D.C., spending over $6 trillion a year,
the common ground.
Millions of people with the capability of overthrowing regimes all around the
Fed,
world.
in the Fed, no more federal government.
If there was no
government,
banks, who would
anything
stop
with Fed in
an
the world, get
brother
rid of
and
it.
sister from fucking?
FBI,
goofy, man. It
doesn't
well, really have anything to
I
do
just want to
with
let you know
what
that
we're
saying
living through.
it's kind of goofy isn't an argument. You just said if we scale the government down to its umpteenth point of scale down, as long as there was still a government, you would want them to enforce action via violate.
Now, Andrew will actually say, and this is a good point he made the other day, if we had he didn't say exactly a strong Christian king, but that's what I would say. If we had a man of God ruling the government, then the small government argument goes out the window, because it doesn't matter how large the government becomes, as long as everybody is culturally or theologically and ideologically unified under a strong leader. It doesn't matter how big it gets. It could be a giant, robust government, and it would still work. The only reason we say make it smaller is because in America we have multiculturalism and diversity and all that crap. So we have to kind of segment out and get into smaller groups and then build up from there. But if we had a unified culture and theology and ideology under a strong man of God ruling us, and a strong government based on God, and a hierarchy of government based on God, then it doesn't matter how big it gets. It could be a giant, robust government. But when you try to do globalism and have everybody involved in every culture and every idea and stuff, then it doesn't work.
Stating the non-aggression principle for your preference. So if there was,
no, that's not what I said.
Well, it's Dave. It is. It's an entailment. If the government's really, really, really big and enforce it right now, and then you say, but if it was really, really small, we would still enforce that because you want to have those laws. Then, regardless of the size of government, the degeneracy is still going to exist, right? And it's still going to need to be enforced against, regardless of the size of the government.
Right.
I'm sorry. Just can you rephrase the question? What is it exactly you're asking me?
It wasn't a question.
I'm asking you. If we reach anarcho utopia, we scale the government
I'm
down
not for a utopia, but
okay.
So
but
whatever.
if we reach anarcho, whatever you want, as the ultimate, right? The government is now scaled down to the point where it's essentially gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you still want enforcement against this kind of thing? And how could you have enforcement against it without a government?
What against what kind of thing?
Like incest or gay marriage or any of these degenerate actions?
Okay, well, I think there's a pretty big gap between incest and gay marriage, but I will say that
what
I think there's a gap between that.
What is it?
But
I don't think
I think they're two different things.
Yeah, they're two different things, but they're the same as far as two consenting adults doing
it's
what they want.
Apples to
right?
oranges.
Yeah,
why can't fruit be compared?
Consenting adults doing what they want, but there's a gap between those things. So anyway,
no, it's not.
What does that have to do? I mean, it logically tracks
dude.
that if dude, you can't go on these long rambling diatribes, and I do 4 seconds. I do 4 seconds, and you go berserk. Just calm down. Let me ask the actual question.
Dude, come on, man. I asked you to clarify your question, and
I'm trying to clarify it so that you understand it.
But don't act like.
Yeah, I don't agree with Andrew there. Andrew's more kind of like being overbearing here and kind of going off the rails. Dave's staying pretty calm, and Dave's really not getting to say much. But
I'm going on these long rants, and you're not talking. I mean,
well, you filibuster. You don't say that much, but I'm still willing to engage.
Oh, come on, Andrew.
I'm super concise. So I'm super concise.
Okay.
I'm going to get right to it, right, so that you understand what I'm saying to you. What I'm asking you is that the enforcement mechanism against this degeneracy, which you consider to be morally wrong, absent a state, are you still going to want an enforcement mechanism against these moral wrongs? You say there's a big difference between incest and homosexual marriage or homosexual sex. However, the truth is that both of these things are exactly logically similar when it comes to two consenting adults doing what it is that they want when they want to do it without hurting anybody else. How's that not the case?
Well, again, as I just pointed out, we're also two consenting adults doing what we want without hurting anyone else. But I think that's very different. So I'm just saying that I'm not even saying I support either of those things. I'm saying I see them as different. No, the truth is that if we didn't have what we have today, and this is what happens with every very powerful centralized government, is that their biggest enemy becomes the family, the church, the community, because they don't like things that compete with them. If we actually got rid of all of the impediments,
but what if
between
the government was
you would
the
see
church?
An enormous return to normalcy in this country. You would see, I mean, look, starting even in the 1930s with Social Security, when you had the government take over the role of we'll take care of old people when they get older. What you used to have was that parents would rely on their children to take care of them when they get older. Once you remove all of the disincentives toward normalcy and family and community, if the state was to be reduced to the size that you're talking about, no, my concern would not be, do we have federal agents with guns going in to break up incest amongst adults anytime it's happening? I don't even know how you would go about enforcing that.
What about people who just want to transition?
Again, again, the transitioning stuff is totally.
What about when you have this libertarian, no government, no state world, and you have a church, and then you have a gay couple that says, we want to get married at your church, and you say, well, I don't want to do it. And then they say, well, that's harming me. You're harming us by discriminating against us and not letting us get married in your church. So now we need to do something about that. We need to rise up against the church because the church is discriminatory and hateful. And people will say, well, that's the government that enforces that. No, that's the people that enforce that.
A statist product. This is something that's come out of the universities that are essentially government programs that has been perpetuated by the corporate media and
I'm not disputing any of that. Should they be allowed to do it though?
No. Well, that's
no.
Listen,
No.
Okay, hold on. Let me say this to be clear. Children, absolutely not. You should not be allowed to do that. Adults.
Oh my God, such a bad argument.
A doctor should lose their license.
You realize children look up to adults. Children learn from adults. Teachers are adults. Parents are adults. So the children are going to learn from the example of the adults. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If the adults are allowed to do this degenerate stuff, kids are going to see it and emulate that.
If they were ever to perform a surgery.
But it's voluntary.
Like sure.
And they consented.
But a license could also be voluntary and a medical board could also be voluntary. So what does that mean?
Well, so that's interesting that you bring that up, considering that the AMA was just a large corporate entity that was not government regulated. Did it get government money? Started off as a trade organization, in fact, and what it did was it defamed all other types of medicine, and that was not the government doing that. That was a private institution.
Yeah, but I'm also going to be fair, and even though I agree with Andrew here, I don't know that he's winning. He's not losing either. There's just really not much of ground being made here. This isn't Andrew's best work. But yeah, Dave is kind of, I don't know. Dave's not really making any good arguments either.
Institution which was doing that. For the purpose, Carnegie. Right. Another private institution, Carnegie. The thing is that private institutions are just as susceptible to this type of overreach as the government is. Well, now, hang on, let me finish. My turn.
Sure. Go ahead.
So as we dive into this, though, these medical licenses, why would you even need to have a medical license in an anarcho-capitalist system? You wouldn't even need to have one. And the voluntarism then of this man who wants to go in and have this elective surgery done, why would that be a problem? There's no medical licenses, Dave. It's anarcho-capitalism, baby.
Okay, so if you're going to say that the worst case scenario in anarcho-capitalism is that some random man could go in and someone would give him this like surgery, okay, fine, I guess. I think that if you're asking why there would be licenses or why there would be voluntary organizations,
chop it up.
Because that's what human beings always naturally gravitate toward.
They're chopping the genitals.
None of that is really the problem. The problem in our society is that this insane shit is being pushed on everyone, and it's being pushed by giant corporations who are connected to the government. It's being pushed by the government class, and most importantly, it's being pushed in the government schools. You know, one of the things, and
it's also being pushed by private institutions and think tanks
and individuals,
lobbyists, and influence the government.
Let me finish.
Let's let Dave finish. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So one of the things that I would say to people listening to this, because I hope you guys will like kind of try to internalize this a little bit. Look, this whole shit, all of this insane degeneracy is being pushed by the most powerful people in this country. And it's not as if this just organically arose out of nowhere. And I hope you guys will at least consider the possibility that, look, the government always, by its nature, moves into the areas that were traditionally left for family and community and churches. And even something like educating the kids. This is one of the biggest problems that we have, that the government is in control of it. And why? And what would happen if they weren't? It would fall back into the realm of families and communities and churches. And what do you think?
Trump is one of the only guys you cannot impersonate. I feel like he's the easiest. It's easy to do a Trump voice. Anybody can do it. I have a very distinct voice that anybody can sound like me.
Think would be better. What do you think would be better? This being run by Washington, D.C., or this being run by your local church? That's kind of the point I'm making. And if that means I have to sacrifice the FBI going on hunts for people having incest, I'm willing to make.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
trade.
these are great. These are almost great points, except that you forget, like these institutions like the AMA and this type of thing, which started out, 150 years ago. The government came in. They used to come in with antitrust laws and break these things up. And under anarcho-America corporatism, these antitrust laws would not exist. These people would become.
Do you know anything?
Let me finish, Dave.
Okay, I apologize. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so anyway, over and over again, we see what happens when.
I think I'm going to get this microphone that Andrew has. I wanted the Shure MX7 or whatever it's called, MXB7, but it's like $400 just for the mic, and you have to get an interface, and you got to get a boom. So it comes out to like $600 or $700. But this is a Shure mic that is. See, so Dave has the Joe Rogan special, the MX. I think it's the MX7. I forget what it's called, but Dave's got the fancy one. Andrew's got the slightly more budget alternative. This mic right here is like $200, and they have a newer model than this one, but it's the same microphone, but it's a newer version of it, and it's like $300. So I think that's the mic that I want to get, and I need a better boom because this boom sucks.
And corporations also gain a huge leverage on power when it comes to no check on them.
Yeah, that is expensive. This is a mic, a boom, and I think it also came with headphones, and it was like $100 on Amazon for everything. But like, this is a professional boom that he has. This boom is probably $100. This mic is like, well, now this one is like 200, but probably when he got it, it was probably 300. And then you need an interface. My interface doesn't work, so interface is like $100. So, but actually, I think this version has USB, so you don't need an interface. But I want to do it with an interface just because it gives you more control options of controlling your levels and stuff, and I just think it sounds better
from any government entity. This was, in fact, the entire point of Franco's Spain and why Mussolini came up with the idea of fascism to begin with, which was that the state needed to stop large trade organizations from swallowing up small trade organizations. That was the point.
All right.
Let me finish, man.
Sorry.
They
I thought you were done.
They recognized that this was an important thing because what ends up happening is corporate power can also become elite and it becomes a government unto itself. Anarcho-capitalism is not going to stop that from happening. And on top of that, when we're talking about these moral oughts, these moral claims, there's not going to be medical licenses. There's no driver's licenses. There's none of these things which would protect you from this degeneracy, which your libertarian idealism leads us to every time. You can't even tell us why any of these things are wrong to do, Dave.
Well, okay. I already told you, and I have the exact same answer for what you have for why they're wrong. But listen, let me ask you this. Have you, because I know you call yourself a paleocon on Twitter. Are you like, are you familiar with like the paleoconservative thinkers? Like,
Pat Buchanan's my favorite. Yeah.
Okay. By the way, for anyone listening here, read every Pat Buchanan book you can get your hands on. They're the absolute best. And Paul Gottfried too. You really should read him. He's just so good. And Sam Francis and all of these guys, dude. Go read them, and you will understand why this is just not right.
No, it's not, because Pat Buchanan would agree with me. He would say these moral oughts. He would say these moral oughts are going to require state enforcement no matter what. That's why he was a paleocon.
Okay, but what Pat Buchanan would not agree with you on is this idea that if there wasn't the government regulating these things, there'd be no reason for anyone to have licenses or something like that. That's just not true, dude. And
who would license them?
Listen, all of these guys, Pat Buchanan, Paul Gottfried, all of these guys, Sam Francis, they all said that a huge part of their program was a drastic cut in the size and scope of government.
Because they didn't like the military-industrial complex.
No. Not just that. Yes, Andrew, believe me, I know this stuff, so I'm not wrong about this. Yes, they wanted a cut in the military-industrial complex, but not just that. They wanted to destroy the managerial state. That was their entire...
Paleocon are like old school conservatives. They weren't warmongers. They weren't... the new like commie capitalist, real extreme capitalism conservatives. They were more, I guess, more closer to like a Christian conservative, more interested in, I don't know a whole lot about it, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But and then the neocons came, and a lot of people nowadays, when they use the word neocon, they're not really using it correctly. They're saying neocon means like new conservative, which is kind of what it means, but they'll call like some I don't know. Some people use it right, but Yeah, I don't know enough about that stuff. I just know that a lot of people, when they say neocon, they're using it wrong. Somebody explained that, and I can't, off the top of my head, explain it to you. And then paleocons, it was like paleocons versus the neocons a long time ago. The neocons came up during, I think, like the French Revolution or something. I don't know. I'm talking about stuff I don't know about, so I'm going to shut up.
Higher plan. Paul Gottfried said, and this was his view, which I thought was a perfect way to say it, which I think you should really consider, that he goes, I am strategically a radical libertarian. And he was very clear that he's not a libertarian because he believes in rights in the same sense that I do.
Rob looked up at that. Rob was like, what?
In your right to live any degenerate lifestyle that you want.
Rob, the moderator, he's a great debater, and he's taking notes right now. I'm sure he's going to talk about this on his show later. But Rob is an epic debater, and Rob's a really smart guy.
Too. But I'm strategically a radical libertarian.
Even Destiny has said Rob is like the best debater on the right. Rob is the only, in Destiny's opinion. So from liberal Destiny says Rob is like the only conservative that is tough to debate and really makes good arguments. I like Rob.
Because he recognized that the only way that you could ever return to normalcy, culturally speaking, was to get DC out of the mix. That the centralized
master debater
cannot be this in control of the way children are raised, the way people are educated, the way people get healthcare and education.
Right, Matthew. Neocon is a liberal buzzword, right? Well, and people on the right use it, but they're using it wrong. It's actually a real movement that started a long time ago to combat something. I forget what they were either combating, like French revolutionary types or sexual revolution or maybe Marxism. They were combating something. They were against something that was happening, and I forget when it happened off the top of my head. But neocon was a real thing, but the way we use it today isn't really talking about those people. It's people are just using it like to mean like new conservatives or fake conservatives, like a rhino. When somebody says neocon on the internet nowadays, usually what they're saying is like a fake conservative or a rhino type. Like, you're not really a conservative. You're like a new conservative. You're like a lefty conservative. And that's not really what it meant or means.
Education and housing without it totally perverting the natural
State
order.
and local governments are just as susceptible to these things, Dave, from lobbying and everything else. And you can't
No,
stop.
you're not.
You
He
can't
is fighting?
stop lobbying, and you can't stop people who have the will of saying, I own myself, from demanding that they be able to be represented, from demanding that they be able to have lobbying, from demanding that they own themselves. They're consenting.
Nice.
That has nothing to do with self-ownership, but okay. But
It clearly does, Dave.
Listen,
I just read an article yesterday that said that they found a new fighter to take his place. So where did you see this, that he's still fighting?
highly recommend, instead of you just trying to win this point against me, go read what Paul Gottfried and Pat Buchanan had to say about this. Because
why? I don't understand. Why can't you make their argument, Dave?
No. I can make their
Then
argument.
make it.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm saying,
stop saying
Andrew,
go
you're already
read
in the
so and
mode
so.
of not trying to hear a point I have to say.
I've heard
You're
everything
trying
you've
to
said.
Fire back immediately to get the win.
Yeah, I don't agree with you, so I'm arguing with you. That's how that works.
I'm saying, right. Okay, I'm saying that these guys who you call yourself a paleoconservative, the people who were the leading thinkers of paleoconservatism, made these points really well. I'm just trying to say, maybe go get it from a source where you'll actually be able to listen to it from. I'm
listening to it from you right now.
Right,
I'm arguing with your points because I don't
for
agree
it.
with your points.
Okay.
And when we get to these ought claims of what we ought to do.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't be like, oh, go read a book. Just tell me make the argument that the book makes so I can talk about that. I don't have time to go read the book right now in the middle of the debate.
It seems like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're like, oh, I think doctors should have their medical licenses revoked for doing this bad thing. But if we're really looking at what self-ownership would be in anarcho-capitalist
that's pretty crazy.
Land, it wouldn't be
That's
licenses
cool.
to begin with. I don't really understand why
there
it
could
is.
be plenty of licenses.
From who? Who would they be issued by?
Organizations, the same as they are now. What do you mean?
So the organization which issued the license would have some sort of authority and would be able to use force, right?
No, not necessarily, but they would be able to use their own version of, like, someone could be banned from their organization. Are you actually making the kind of like Bastiat thing where you can't separate government from society and that there can't be anything other than like there? I mean, look, obviously all of the government involvement aside, but we all know that we were told a couple things not to say before we got on this show, right? Because of the YouTube government. There's lots of different.
Yeah, why would you have a problem with YouTube? That's a private organization doing what it wants, Dave.
What are you asking me now?
Why would you have a problem with YouTube? That's a private organization doing what it wants.
You guys, by the way, can you guys see? This is what's frustrating to me. If you could see, I just made a point. It was an excellent point, and then you immediately just pivot to something else and move the goalpost. So anyway,
it was your point, Dave.
The point I was making was that there can be private organizations that can have their standards also, and then you pivoted to saying, "Do I support YouTube and what they do? In what context? What do you mean?"
No, what you said was we had some TOS or things which would be TOS that we couldn't talk about on this private platform, but you must support private platforms existing because you're an anarcho-capitalist.
No,
so what's the problem? So you don't support private platforms existing?
Listen, man, do you support private restaurants existing?
Sure.
Okay, if they brought you, you ordered a T-bone steak and they brought it to you and it was freezing cold, would you support that because you support private restaurants existing?
No.
Exactly.
What does that have to do with anything?
It proves exactly.
But you believe that the restaurant should have the right. Wait, Dave. You believe
something existing doesn't mean
that's super weird, Dave. So you don't believe that restaurants should have the right to serve you a cold steak?
No, I do.
Well, then what are you talking about, Dave?
Did you honestly not get that?
I didn't honestly get that. No, it made no sense.
All right.
But listen. What
Dave is, you, dude.
What Dave is saying is, I don't support YouTube doing that. But what Andrew is saying, but do you support the right of a private organization to make their own choices? To which I believe Dave's answer is, yeah, they could make that choice, but I personally don't like that choice. I'm not in support of that choice. But I think Andrew, the point he's making is, yeah, but if you had an anarcho-capitalist society, these bad organizations would exist and they would do bad things. And you would have to say they're allowed to do it.
Well, okay, fine. If you want to say, oh, if we had an anarcho-capitalist society, this thing in my head would happen and it could be really bad, whatever.
I wish they would go. I wish you, but Dave winged his intro, so he didn't. I don't really like Dave's style either, but and Andrew's style is entertaining. I don't think it's the most effective, but I don't think Andrew's trying to change minds. I don't know. I don't really know, but I wish they would just go point through libertarian policy. So let's talk about drug legalization and what harms that would lead to and why that's not a good idea. Let's talk about sexual liberation, what harms that could lead to and why that's a problem and why we need an arm of government, an enforcement arm of the law to stop those things. I feel like that would be more productive.
I'm not going to sit here and even argue about that stuff. Okay, fine. I'm talking about how about in the real world? We live under the biggest government in the history of the world, and look what it's led to. Let's talk about the world we actually live in.
Okay, let's talk about the world that we actually live in. It's my belief that the leftist paradigm, which is a libertarian paradigm of the non-aggression principle, is how leftists are able to control inside of this ginormous government apparatus, which they're continuously expanding. I think that they utilize victim classes like LGBTQ and others.
I think sometimes Andrew misses the arguments just because he's really just trying to win the debate. He's trying to destroy the opponent. And so sometimes he might like miss the arguments. He doesn't listen as much as he should, I think. I'm being critical, but I'm trying to be fair too. I like Andrew.
And say if they're not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? Libertarians have no way to counteract this because they can't justify why it would be a problem either. So what they end up doing is saying, well, we can't really say shit, can we? We can't really tell you that gays can't be married. We can't really tell you not to expand victim classes. We can't really tell you any of these things because ultimately you believe in the same principle that they do, which is do whatever the fuck you want as long as you're not hurting anybody, man. The good is the good, man.
Yeah,
smoke
man.
the dope, man.
Cool,
All
man.
of this is
Smoke the
that's
dope,
just
brah.
completely ridiculous. I think that libertarianism, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, would tell you that the Civil Rights Act was not justified, would tell you that government funding all of these universities is not justified, would tell you that all of this stuff, like, I mean, it would tear down the entire thing.
Wait, it would tell you slavery was or abolishing slavery wasn't justified?
What?
Would it tell you that abolishing slavery wasn't
what does
justified?
That have to do with what I just said?
Because that was an act of government, right?
Wait, hold on. But what does that have to do with what I just
Because
said?
when you're talking about civil rights, we're still going back to self-ownership.
The Civil Rights Act has nothing to do with slavery, dude.
No, but it has to do with self-ownership. And pre-Civil Rights Act, there were slaves, right?
No.
Yeah, there wasn't?
When did you think the Civil Rights Act happened?
The Civil Rights Act happened during the Jim Crow era. But what I'm talking about with slavery specifically is did they have
100 years before the Civil Rights Act?
Yes. Did they have a right to self-ownership?
Anyway, yes, slaves had a right to not be slaves. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that
Then we have logical extensions here, then, Dave, that we have to contend with.
Okay, leave Dave finish his point.
All right, Andrew, whatever, dude. All right, listen, the point that I'm making is to just say that what's happening in a college campus, which is essentially a government program. I mean, all of these colleges, whether they're like state schools or whether they just had all of their loans, guaranteed by the federal government or directly given out by the federal government, it's a big, giant government program. And the idea that they would ever sustain themselves in a market is ridiculous. And the fact that there are young people in those groups now want to identify as not the gender that they were born in has nothing to do with the non-aggression principle or self-ownership or
oligarchy.
anything about libertarian
How does it not have to do with
philosophy on government?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Or,
That's bullshit.
Doesn't it all,
Yeah,
dude?
not only that, but I've been demonstrating it over and over, and you have no defense from it. If you own yourself, why can't you choose your gender? Why can't you get your appendages cut off? Why can't you do these things, Dave? Why shouldn't you be able to?
Wait, if you don't own listen, this is the thing I think you're not understanding, Andrew. I don't even get what you're saying here. If you don't own yourself,
which I don't think you do.
Right. Okay. Why shouldn't you be able to get your
That's my whole principle is it because there is no actual
Man, we're listening at 1.25 speed. We're not going to get through it because I thought it was over, but it looks like it's still going. So we're not going to be able to hear all this.
Ownership.
Okay. I'm saying if
that's
you're
a
right.
non sequitur, Dave. It makes no sense.
Oh my God.
Okay.
What's a non sequitur, Andrew?
The
What did you
sequitur
just
is
say was a
saying,
non
what
sequitur?
if you don't own yourself, you can do those things too. It has nothing to do with whether you do or not.
Right. But you said, what if you do own yourself? And I'm saying, but what if you don't? So that's the point.
Yeah. What does that have to do with anything? That's the non sequitur.
If I may, I think that there's two ships passing here. I think that the argument that Dave's making is this. If we decrease the size of the federal government and the government in general, as if he's suggesting, culturally, there wouldn't be the sort of brainwashing that's going on through those organizations that make these things a problem. Andrew's saying, though, but the principle of if you own yourself, you could do whatever you want is foundational to a lot of these egregious behaviors that we would see. And so even if we shrunk the size of government, if we did so based on the mentality of, well, you could do whatever you want as long as it's agreed upon by consenting adults,
it still
we would
wouldn't
see a
work.
lot of behavior that he finds to be undesirable or grotesque or sins, such as incest, homosexual relationships, etc.
Oh, all right. Let me ask you this. So
it doesn't matter how big the government is.
We could probably all agree that between, let's just say in the last 100 years, okay, the size and scope of government in this country has grown enormously. Obviously, if you are familiar with the paleoconservatives, they were, hearkening back to the old conservatives who fought the New Deal back in the 1930s. And I could go back a little bit further than that to Woodrow Wilson creating the central bank and the income tax. But you have the New Deal, you have the expansion.
That's what I think it is. And I think the neocons were pro-New Deal. The paleocons were against the New Deal, I think.
Of government in World War II, the expansions post-World War II with the creation of the CIA and all of that stuff, the national security apparatus.
It was when the conservatives kind of split.
You have the Great Society in the 1960s. You have, I don't know, you fast forward to George W. Bush creating the Department of Homeland Security and the war on terrorism and Barack Obama and all this stuff. Do we have more degeneracy now or then? Does it seem like the growth of government?
Yeah, but that's a correlate. If I could point to you where there's large,
I'm just asking. But I'm asking, is there any correlation or any causation?
There's some correlation, and I'll grant that there's some correlation. But I can also point to large government apparatuses where the state is entirely in control, where there's no degeneracy because you just face the wall in those governments, right? Sure. So the thing is that just correlating that because government has grown in size and degeneracy has also grown in size, it's not a good argument because I can point to complete authoritarian regimes where there's none of that at all, and the government's totally in charge. So the thing is that
so what regimes are you thinking of?
I would guess that like places like North Korea, right? If you engage in degenerate actions, X bad thing happens to you.
China.
So I'm just saying that the correlate itself is not enough to say that is the cause.
China.
NGOs are also a huge cause of these things. Even NGOs which start absent any type of government movement at all, or massive think tanks which are privately funded. And oftentimes you see what'll happen with like the LGBTQ community and things like this, they create their own independent think tanks and NGOs, which then begin a mass lobbying campaign against morality. And once you have a lobbying campaign against morality, there's no real good reason why you should reduce government because you can't make good claims for why you should. It's just like, why should we do any of this stuff? What happens with these LGBTQ think tanks especially, they'll even go into Christian churches, things like this. They offer them bags of money to reevaluate the messaging inside of these churches. Yep. These are apparatuses which then go and bribe the government. And these are private institutions. They all start as private institutions. The government's not commissioning.
But then they go and bribe the government.
Yeah, but the government. But here's the thing.
Part of it.
But here's the thing. I think that private institutions will always either form a government or make moves to subvert a government because it's in their best interest to monopolize force. It's in their best interest to do it, just like it's in our best interest as Christians to monopolize the force apparatus of the state as well.
Right.
If you want to scale back aspects of the state, fuck, great. I want to scale back aspects of the state too.
Well,
but that really ultimately has
so
nothing to do.
What aspects do you want to scale back?
Oh, I'd like to scale back, especially social spending when it comes to social safety nets. I'd like to scale back
military.
Why would you want to?
Some of the military spending.
Interrupt you, but so why do you want to scale back social?
We don't need to be the world police.
Because
save a lot of money if we
many
just
of those
protected
social
our
aspects
home.
are violations of ethical concerns.
Instead of
So an
protecting
ethical
everybody
concern
else's
of robbing
house.
Peter to pay Paul, various things like this. I think that those are unethical. Those are ethics concerns.
Okay, and why? Why is that unethical?
It's unethical because I follow Christian ethics, and under this particular ethical framework, we would say that this type of theft would be incorrect, and that the state apparatus is not really their concern to move into that. That would be charitable organizations, which would move into doing distribution that way.
I'm so curious about this, so I just have to ask because you kind of like grilled me before about what my ethics are. So what is it? So
we share the same. We share the same ethics. So I don't know what your argument is.
I'm not making an argument. I'm asking a question. So robbing Peter to pay Paul, why is that unethical? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm saying that if you have centralized relocation from the successful to the non-successful, the reason that this becomes an ethical concern is because you're engaging in theft, obvious theft.
Okay, but isn't that always what government does by its nature?
No,
is robbing Peter to pay Paul?
No, I don't think that taxation is necessarily theft.
Okay, so based off the little scroll bar down here, they get into super chats, reading the super chats. So questions from the argument or question from the audience comes up in about 20 minutes, and I have to go in 10 minutes. So we're going to get most of the debate, but I'm sure there's going to be more debate to be had once the questions start coming in from the audience, and you guys can go watch it on the Crucible. But we got like 10 minutes before I got to go.
Wait, I think so it can be theft.
What makes it theft in your description, but not in others?
In which description?
So you just said it's obviously theft to rob Peter to pay Paul. So what made that theft and what makes it not theft in other situations?
Well, I don't. Maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly. Can you give me an example?
You just said in your example that this was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's theft. So what makes it theft in that situation, but not theft in other situations?
Like what other situation are you talking about? Dude, I just need a comparison real quick so I understand what you're asking.
What makes it in any other situation that government takes money from people not theft, but in the one you just labeled theft?
You mean, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying, why is it theft to take a bunch of money out of a rich guy's account and give it to a guy, who's just poor because you want to, versus some other unique situation like infrastructure spending or things like this?
What you just said, Andrew. Stop buying time, man. I'm just curious.
I'm not trying to buy time. I just want.
Dave is saying, why is social spending bad? Why is it bad to take money from the rich guy to give it to the poor guy like Robin Hood? But why is it not bad for the government to take money out of your check and spend it on roads and bridges and military and police?
I want to get it clarified. I just want it clarified. Okay, I don't think that infrastructure spending is theft. I don't think that taxation, property taxation even is theft. I don't think those things are theft. I think that a direct taking of your account for the purposes of giving it to a social group based on immutable characteristics is theft. That would be theft.
I'm just curious. What makes that theft?
That you're taking a thing which does not belong to you and creating a distribution of the thing which doesn't belong to you.
But so why wouldn't that be true for property taxes?
Because you don't actually own the property.
Right. So, but
right. Infrastructure spending, you use the roads to go to work to make your money. So that's why it's not theft when the government takes a little chunk of your paycheck to pay for those roads. It becomes theft when they're taking taxes and you don't know what it's going to, and it's paying for this, that, and the other. But if it's paying for something that you're using to make the money, in order for me to make Caesar's money, I need to use his roads to get to my job. Then I have to give a little bit of my money to pay for those roads. But I shouldn't have to give my money to pay for this lazy ass who doesn't do anything.
But you just said they're taking something that doesn't belong to you. So do you actually own that property?
No, this is why I'm saying that the construction, the construction of ownership is just that, a construction.
Yeah,
so property
Andrew,
is a construction.
Hold on, Andrew, I think I have you in something here, and I think I do. Why was it
No,
theft
I just want to make sure I'm clarifying
Why was it theft in your example? Why did you own it in your example, but not in mine?
Because I don't really understand your example. That's why I'm trying to get it clarified.
It wasn't mine. It was yours. I'm saying
yes, the
your
example
You
of
called
scaling
it theft.
scaling back to rob Peter to pay Paul. I would say that is theft. However, taxation for property, I would not say it is because
when
it's
you're
based,
robbing Peter to pay Paul, why is it theft?
Yeah, because it's based around the construction which we have for theft or non-theft for property. That's the point.
If I may, if I could try to clarify, I'm not trying to make anyone's argument.
Yeah. Just clarify what he's talking about.
This is what's going on. Dave's saying, like, look, if under your theory, all taxation would be theft because it's taking away from a person and giving to someone else. You seem to be saying it's not theft if it's giving to sort of a public good. So like property tax to pay for roads, that's not theft. But property tax, presumably you would say this property tax to pay for welfare for single mothers, that would be theft.
There you go, Rob.
LGBT issues or something.
See,
like
Rob
that.
knows.
So he's saying, why isn't the property tax always theft? And you seem to be saying it's only theft if that money is given to particular entities. He's asking why that's the case.
Oh, based on immutable versus non-immutable. So if you are utilizing infrastructure and things like this, and you're paying for that infrastructure, you have local levies which are gone through and voted on for that infrastructure.
Right.
That can't be theft because essentially the majority of your population is volunteering to move that money into the government coffers for that purpose. Whereas there is no such thing as voluntarism when it comes to the government levying your account. That's not voluntary and never has been. However, you have what's called... Sorry. I'm going to explain. You have what's called duties, right? Duties. Duties can trump theft. For instance, you could say if you own yourself and the government conscripts you that they're stealing you. Are they stealing you, Dave?
I'm sorry. Are they stealing
If the government conscripts you, you have a duty to go. A duty to go defend your homeland if you are conscripted for war. Is the government
but you own yourself.
If they're enslaving you, sure.
It's enslavement to be conscripted in a draft to defend your homeland.
Well, I mean, look, you see, to defend your homeland. How about if they conscript you to go over to Ukraine and fight the Russians? Is that enslaving you?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is because I think you do have duties.
So if your government led by Joe Biden decides that you're now conscripted and you will be on a plane over to Ukraine to fight on the front lines,
I ain't going there. No, I ain't fighting. Ain't
no, I don't think so. I think
ain't no Russian ever did nothing
Don't you think
to
you
me.
have duties to be conscripted? Like if you were attacked.
No, I think we have lots of duties, but I think if Joe Biden tells you to go die on the front
you might be able to make good moral. Yeah, you might be able to make good.
Daddy Jub can go fight the Russians. I'm over 35, so I don't have to be drafted anymore. Ha! Draft the women and draft Daddy Jub.
Bro, you might be resist that. Dave, you might be able to make good moral objections to this type of draft and the duty itself. That's fine. However, if your homeland's attacked and you're conscripted.
Well, Andrew also does it for a living and he makes good money doing it. But yeah, he's usually debating TikTokers and YouTubers and stuff like that. Whereas Dave is like on stages debating high level like things in politics and stuff. Andrew isn't as much a politic guy as a theology and a philosophy guy. So Andrew's great with the transcendental stuff and the philosophy and the theology, but this is a political debate, which is not, and Andrew says it all the time, this is not his forte. So he's trying to turn it into a philosophical argument about basically do as thou wilt versus Christianity. Whereas Dave's taking it as a political policy debate about the best system of government. And I think that's where there's like a bit of a disconnect here.
Scripted. That's okay, right? But how is that not enslavement then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it is. Or
it's not. Or it is.
I know that's what you're saying. I'm just re-saying what you're saying.
Yes.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Nada. I'm saying the same thing you're saying.
Essentially, yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. So great. So no duty at all. No duties.
Here's the thing: is that it's funny because you start laughing, but then like you can't. When I say if you were grabbed, gun put to your head, and dragged out to the Ukrainian front lines and forced to fight on the Ukrainian front lines, you can't say yes. That is me being enslaved.
I think you can make moral objections to it. Yeah.
Hold on. Then you turn it to what if like people are invading our country. Okay, so I'll say this. If people were invading our country and people like a foreign army is coming up through my neighborhood, I think you sure could make a moral argument that I have a responsibility to go to those front line.
Right. This is the point when we're talking about the draft. We're not talking past each other.
Let me just finish this. So I think you could make an argument that I have a moral responsibility to go to the front lines and start fighting to make sure my family is okay.
What if you don't have a
However-
family?
Leave him finish.
Huh?
What if you don't? What if you don't have a family? It's just
Okay,
you.
but I'm talking about me, and I do. So anyway, let me finish.
But what if you
So-
didn't?
Okay, now let's go back to normal speed for like 5 minutes.
Would you have a moral obligation then?
Great. So let me just finish.
Okay.
So, but if I say make the judgment that I go, you know what? There's too many of them. We got to retreat and we got to try to surround them and come back. And someone puts a gun at my face and goes, no, you have to go to the front line right now. Then yeah. And
Unfortunately, I'm behind here, so when I get off and go on my phone and try to watch the rest of the debate while I get ready for work, it's probably going to get removed and put behind a paywall. I have a feeling that Andrew's going to do that, which I don't have a problem with that. It just sucks for me because I'm going to miss a chunk of the debate.
in essence, they have enslaved me.
So,
And-
so then you're making my point again, so that you understand.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, I'll explain how. When you're talking about duties, you asked me, you said, would it be a duty? So I'm talking about what is a current duty. So I'm saying, yeah, currently that would be your duty. But to moral objections, which you could make would be abound just. You could say it's an unjust war, so therefore it doesn't fall under my duties. You are making the exact same claim. This is an unjust war, it doesn't fall under my duties, right? So if I'm conscripted, though, for a just war, like an invasion, then it does fall under duty. So then it's not enslavement, right? However,
No.
in both situations, it still would be enslavement by your ideology.
No,
you don't really
because
have
that's
duty
not-
here.
That's not really the distinction. The distinction is whether voluntarism versus force. So no, I'm not saying that. Like, if there could be a just war where someone still flees and abandons the war, but that doesn't mean that if they were but look, even whether you
Dereliction of
whether
duty.
you think it's justified or not, it would still be enslaving someone to force them to be a soldier in that war.
So if
they
you
didn't want to be a part of it.
So if you're conscripted and your homeland is under attack, you have no greater duty to defend your homeland.
It depends on the situation, man. Look, there were lots of people in Ukraine who fled, and I don't know that they were wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
Listen,
what I just did. That's why I just did, but I don't know if you're right about that, because sometimes I've done this before, and when they end the stream, I don't know. You might be right. I'm not sure.
Situation like the war in Ukraine, the United States of America.
I feel like
and
sometimes
NATO
I've been watching one
provoked Russia
to
for
catch up, and I'm behind,
decades.
and it just
Literally
stops.
just poked.
Yeah,
this
what is that?
fucking bear.
Dude, this is on a tangent that has nothing, no bearing on the moral.
Hold on. No. It has total bearing. Give me.
All right, I gotta go, guys. That was pretty interesting, and they're gonna get into super chats in like 10 minutes. But they're still live. They're still going. So there's gonna be more debate during the super chats and the questions. So I'm gonna get ready for work and watch this on my phone. You guys can go over to the Crucible. They're almost at 100,000 subscribers. So go give them a subscribe. Tell them JS sent us. We'll do a little 4-person raid over there, except I don't have permission to raid his channel. I don't even know how to do that. I've tried it once and it didn't work. I don't think it's Andrew's best work. I don't think it's his greatest performance. But like we said, he's more of a philosophy and theology guy. Really more philosophy mainly. And then theology and then politics. Or maybe philosophy, politics, theology, but he's more a philosophy guy. Dave is more of a politics guy. So yeah, they were missing each other on a lot of stuff. There was a lot of talking over each other. I wish they would have had more of a intro, timed intros, timed opening statements, timed rebuttals, maybe timed cross-examinations, and then open discussion, and then timed closing statement, something like that, to get to have less interruption. But not Andrew's greatest work in this one. There's a lot of things I was hoping they were going to touch on that they didn't even get into. But yeah, you guys can go watch this on the Crucible. Dave's political kung fu is very strong with the strong with the politics. You are. Here's this one. This one is studied greatly in the dark arts. The force, the dark side of the force, is with this one. Yes. All right. I'll see you guys later. God bless everybody. Hit the like button on your way out. Go check out the Crucible. Say JS Urban Adventures sent us. And I'll catch you guys later. I'm out. Peace.